Hey guys, how's it going? Uh, so this is something new. I have been working with my compatriots, my comrades, Christopher Hansen and Jim Majors, and we have this new podcast starting. This is called the Unheavenly Hosts. This is where we discuss biblical subjects in pretty good depth, I think. Uh, we're gonna have some introductory episodes to more broad topics. This is one such topic, the Dead Sea Scrolls, uh, and the main channel, the Unheavenly Host channel. I have a link to it in the description, and I will be mirroring this video on that channel. Pretty soon after the stream is over. So we can hop right into it and talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, gentlemen, if you guys want to give yourself some, your good old introductions, just who you are, what you do, that kind of stuff. We can probably hop right into it just after that.
Okay, so I'm Chris. I am one of the biblical history skeptics, and basically the only thing that I do on my channel is with my co-host Brian. We are reading the Bible from beginning to end. We're going to overtake you guys before long because you guys read slow. Other than that,
you know what? Our Chris reads slow, but he's not reading anymore. So,
other than that, basically the only thing I do is I float around other channels like a leech.
Hello, I am another leech. I'm Jim Majors. Most of you probably know me, and if not, well, you probably doesn't matter. You probably shouldn't. But I'm also known as the disciple of Kairos. You can find me on Twitter at the Jim Majors. Kairos is Kairos. Check me out. I do biblical criticism, debates. I've got some debates with Kent Hovind and some other Christian apologists on there, and I'll be adding a lot more soon. So go give me a subscribe.
And definitely go to the Unheavenly Host channel and subscribe there, because after this stream, we will be streaming there exclusively. So, anyways, let's hop right into the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, when talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, if you don't know a lot about the topic, they kind of stir up a lot of emotions. I've heard claims that they date back to 2000 BCE. I've heard some other crazy claims about the Dead Sea Scrolls, but there's a lot of mystery surrounding them if you haven't actually taken the time to look into them and what they are. So let's hop right into the discovery. So how these were discovered. So the early discoveries were made by just some Bedouins. They stumbled upon a cave. Now we just call it Cave 1. And this was in the winter of 1946 to 47. They discovered 7 scrolls. Now, initially, 4 of the scrolls went to they were purchased by the Syrian Orthodox Archbishop of Jerusalem, Athanasius Samuel. And then the other 3 were purchased by a scholar at Hebrew University. His name was Sukenik. So the 7 scrolls, for anyone that's interested, here are some of their names. There's a character of a Jewish sectarian association. Now it's called the Manual of Discipline. There was also discovered Tales of the Patriarchs, Thanksgiving Psalms, a commentary on Habakkuk, the War Scroll, and 2 copies of Isaiah. So Samuel wanted to have these scrolls authenticated. So this was in 1955. Some other stuff was already beginning to be discovered at this point in other caves around the area. So the scrolls were authenticated, and we'll get into the dating in a bit. So by 1955, the Bedouin actually discovered 9 more caves, and then the 11th cave was discovered in 1956. Many of the scrolls were published by 1968, but the process slowed. There was a monopoly on their publishing. The group was very close knit, and it was taken over by a group that was chosen by the Israeli government, I believe, and nobody else was allowed to publish these except for them. So the process was very slow. People started to get pretty antsy about it. They wanted to know what these scrolls were, the unpublished ones. So by the 1980s, there were a lot of complaints, as you could imagine. And then in the 1990s, the original team, aging, they started dying off. And then a new team was assembled, so the monopoly was destroyed. And in 1991, all the texts were published, and that was 45 years after the initial discovery. So let's get into some of the stuff that they found. The total amount of documents that were found there were thousands of fragments, and they cover about 900 different documents. So there was a lot of them. And some of the stuff that they found are things that are known to us today, and other stuff we did not know existed until then. So here's just some of the very important scrolls found at Qumran. There are of course copies of the biblical books, mostly of the Torah. There was the Damascus document, which we actually also found copies of that, medieval copies of that, in the Cairo Geniza. And it's a later version of a different document called the Community Rule. And they give you rules, they give the community rules for life, stuff like and the annual census, how to take it. There are hymns with calendar details and stuff about the secrecy of the doctrine. And
Hey,
then
Lawrence,
there's a lot more.
Sorry to interrupt you. I think there's something wrong with your mic. It sounds like seals in the background or something.
Is that my mic?
Do you hear that, Chris?
I don't hear it. It might be my side.
Okay. Oh, yep. It was you. It was you, Chris.
Oh, all right. That's a shame.
Sorry about that.
All right. Hopefully that wasn't too annoying to the people. Although it looks like people did notice that a little. Okay. That's fine. We got that resolved. So, anyways, where was I? We also found the War Scroll. This one's kind of cool. So this is abbreviated as 4QM. And it was preparations for an eschatological battle. There was also the Copper Scroll, which I don't know if Jim will be going into that, but it basically looks like a treasure map, and it was, instead of being written on either papyrus or leather, it was written in copper, which gives it its name, the Copper Scroll, which reads like a treasure map, but because of, we might get into it later, but I have my doubts on that, because that would be the only instance of a treasure map ever. There were peshers, or commentaries, in a way, exegesis, on Habakkuk, Nahum, and some of the Psalms. That's just some of the stuff that we found there. We found a lot more. You can imagine, with 900 total documents, how much stuff we have uncovered there. So those are some of the contents. and the discovery and the translation. It was also written in a variety of languages and scripts. It was written in at least a dozen scripts. It was written in Aramaic, Hebrew, and Paleo Hebrew. But the Paleo Hebrew was mostly the Torah, the Mosaic books, and Job, because they were seen. And I'm sorry if you guys hear the grandfather clock in the back, but they were seen as the oldest. So these were actually written in archaized form. So if one of us tried to write something in Old English, but instead threw the word yeet in there or YOLO or something, someone reading that would know, okay, this isn't actually from that period. This is an archaized form.
And this guy is not
Um,
cool.
Also, yes, there are also some cryptic scripts. That was coded language. Now, of course, the most common one was cryptic script A, which has been decoded, and there were 15 scrolls that contained it in some form or another, either all of them completely or just in marginal notes. Yeah, but the mistakes in the Paleo Hebrew showed that it showed their true time of writing. So that covers the languages and the scripts, the discovery. And now I believe we can probably hop into origins and dating. Jim, if you want to take that away, unless I missed something that you guys wanted to hit on.
No, nothing that we can't bring up later or within our own introductions. I don't think. Okay, so
All right,
with that,
fantastic.
I'll go over the
Chris, how about you?
You good with that, Chris?
All good on my end. How does my mic
Oh,
sound?
hold on, Jim, you're lagging out.
I'm lagging.
There we go. How's my mic?
Hello, am I okay?
Lawrence, you're the one lagging.
Lawrence is a
All
lagger.
right, lagging then, because you guys are cutting out a lot.
That's you, buddy.
Yeah, it's all you.
Damn. Okay, well, you guys take the reins then.
Wait, before.
Okay.
How's my mic?
Your mic sounds fine.
Okay.
Yeah, your mic
Is mine
sounds
okay?
fine. Yeah, it's okay now.
Okay. So now that we're all good and we're all beautiful, I'm gonna go ahead and start. Okay. Okay. So as far as the dating of the sea scrolls, like Lawrence said, they were found in most of them were found in 47, and some of the scholars at the time of the finding came to the conclusion that the Dead Sea Scrolls could be attributed to the Essenes, which was one of the three sects of Judaism in Second Temple Judaism that some scholars believe inhabited the area during the 1st century BCE. There are some scholars who believe that the Essenes were nothing more than a literary device that was just made up. But for the most part, most of them do believe that the Essenes were a real sect. They were not made up, and quite a few scholars still believe that the Essenes were the people who were responsible for the authorship of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they believe that they inhabited that area during the 1st century because of the earliest datings of the scrolls. But the only ways that they had to test the manuscripts at the time was by using paleographic methodology and archaeology of the surrounding area to determine the date. So that's just analyzing the text, just prima facie, just whatever lies on the surface, just how it's written, grammar, syntax, context, and then of course archaeology, whatever. And some of that archaeology included they dug up some ritual baths, some ritual Jewish baths in the area that led credence to the claim that it was founded by a Jewish sect. Then there are some people who hold to the claim that it was just sectarians in general, so they don't really claim that it was the Pharisees or the Sadducees or the Essenes, that it was just that it could have been any one of them, that the evidence is too spurious to say definitively. then later in 1951, Dr. Willard Libby, who was a chemist, actually one of the people responsible for the development of radiocarbon dating, used the same method that he invented on a piece of linen that was wrapped around one of the scrolls, because in order to do radiocarbon dating, the C14 dating, it takes a pretty large sample size, a few grams. And that was way too precious to waste that much material of something so important. So rather, they used something surrounding it, and they found that to be 1,917 years old before that time, plus or minus 200 years. But it wasn't until the development of accelerator mass spectrometry, that we were able to test the actual scrolls themselves, because using this method, we had the ability to accurately date the decay of the C14 isotopes with a much smaller sample than the radiocarbon dating required. So in 1990, 14 scrolls were chosen for testing, and took 20 samples, and the dates were compared to the early paleographic dating results, which weren't disclosed to them until after the tests were complete. The results were in agreement for the most part. There were samples from scrolls 1, 12, 13, and 14 that were used as a standard for comparison, because the paleographic dating was largely agreed upon in the scholarly community. And these 4 were pretty much just right on the money, or close to the paleographic age, with very little variance. And the small variance in these 4 could be explained by a variety of variables, including measurements of the tree's C14 isotopes, or any other number of variables, including glues, adhesives, any kind of ink. And since there was no evidence of it being a reused parchment, there was no reason to believe that it was anything older than the okay. So these 4 were right on. I'm sorry. Then sample 2, it was the Testament of Kahat. It had a 200-year gap between the paleographic dating results and the 4 new carbon-14 results. And they repeated this experiment several times. And on this one, they could find no evidence of it being a reused parchment. So there's no reason for them to believe that that it was any older than what it said it was in the paleographic, just examining it. And they then come to find out the different cleaning methods that they use on this particular one skewed the results. And some of these results were skewed up to 350 years away from the paleographic dating. And this was not something that occurred with any of the other scrolls when the samples were tested using the different cleaning methods. So why that happened, we don't really know. It could be, like I said, the adhesives or the ink, or something in the parchment itself. But it was just with that second sample. For the most part, the rest of them, they agreed within about 35 years of each other. The benchmarks essentially that they had set out. Let's see. Oh yeah, and so along with the discovery of these Jewish ritual baths and some iconography, combined with some external textual evidence that they got from the writings of Josephus and Pliny the Elder, both of whom wrote and claimed that the Essenes were in the area in that time. There are other scholars that simply aren't comfortable enough with that evidence, and like I said, they generally attribute the writings to Second Temple Jewish sectarians as a whole. There are other theories, include specific sectarians. Some believe that it was the Sadducees, specifically because the Dead Sea Scrolls mention them. They have priestly writings and priestly legislature that mentions them being descended from the high priest Zadok, who is the Sadducees' namesake. That's who they're named after. And then they later brought the scrolls to Qumran for safekeeping. Another one is that Christians in Jerusalem during 68 to 78 to 70 CE, during Romans invasion and the onslaught in Jerusalem, that the Christians brought the Dead Sea Scrolls to Qumran and hid them for safekeeping. But as far as what the origin is, there is no consensus. There's really no way to tell without doing some further archaeological evidence. And fortunately, we are finding things all the time. Even though they stopped doing the archaeological digs over there I think they stopped in like 50 or 51, right, Lorence?
No, I think the digs were still going on.
Well, at one point, the digs were taken over by the Bedouins, by the original discoverers, because everybody else had left, and they were just like, okay, this is good enough. And then they began to find more scrolls.
So one thing I want to bounce off of that, when it comes to the dating, because I don't think you exactly said it, but the scrolls date from the 2nd century BCE.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
To the
2nd century CE.
The 1st century.
The oldest one is an Isaiah text, and it dates back to the mid 2nd century, like 150, 155, something like that, I believe. And the early one is like 60, 68.
68.
68 CE of the Common Era.
Yeah. And a couple other things, because I forgot to actually say them. When it comes to the authorship of some of the texts actually claimed to be written by Moses. So that explains why a group of Jehovah's Witnesses came to my door and used that as evidence of Moses. And then I had to tell them the date, what the dating of the scrolls. And they had the idea that, they were written by Moses himself.
Why'd you have to do him like that?
What?
Why'd you have to do him like that? You broke their heart.
You know what? And then one other thing, just to mitigate any confusion later in the stream, how we identify them. So there are 11 caves, which, in order to identify a single scroll, let's say I want to look up the 500th scroll to come out of cave 4. I would say 4Q500. So the cave number comes first, and then Q for Qumran, and then the scroll to come out of that cave in order.
The first excavated.
Yeah. So that's just to mitigate any confusion later. So when I start talking about 7Q5, which will be after Chris gets into some stuff, then that'll make sense. You'll understand what I mean.
You probably just helped Chris out.
So, Jim, if you have covered your portion of origin and dating, and Chris, if you have anything to add on to that, feel free to. But then
that's it. That's all I've got. Chris wants to add anything.
All right, then it is your turn, Chris, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I've got nothing to add to Jim's, so we'll move on to then variations in the scrolls.
Yes, variations. Now, these are very important, and I think they're very cool. And I will also be right back. I have to feed my cat.
Okay, so there are a lot of important variations in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Some of them are, the vast majority of them are going to be like New Testament differences. They're just going to be a scribe didn't care how he spelled something, or there's going to be like an accidentally omitted letter or a duplicated letter, etc. But there are a few that are extremely important. I'm going to focus on particularly 3 main variants that we are going to be finding in 3 different books that they have recorded. So the first one is there are 2 very important readings that the Dead Sea Scrolls give us on Deuteronomy 32, 8 through 9, particularly Deuteronomy 32, 8. And when we look at that in the Masoretic text, we have the reading the sons of Israel, the Bene Yisrael. The reason that exists has become apparent because when we discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, we went through and we looked at them, and we found two different readings from two different scrolls. One is from the 2nd century BCE. One is from the Herodian era. They give us the readings of Bene Elohim and Bene El. Those two readings lend credence to the idea that originally Deuteronomy 32, 8 through 9 was not actually the monotheistic passage that it had been altered to be in the Masoretic text, but was actually indicative of polytheism, in that it originally the head god in the passage is El, and Yahweh receives an apportionment from El, which is the reading that has been given by most. And then that same problem also then we found occurring in the Septuagint, where they had altered it to the angels of God instead of the sons of El. But there's also then we find that reading preserved in one line of the Septuagint's transmission as well, where we do have the sons of God recorded, which would correspond to either Elohim or El, depending on which one they decide to translate from. So that's one of the major ones, and that's a huge theological alteration right there that was caused in later lines of transmission. Another really important one for talking about the Book of Job come in the Paleo-Hebrew scripts. These were found. The Paleo-Hebrew Job manuscript was found in Cave 4. And it is extremely important for us trying to determine the readings. Now, back in the 1980s, David Noel Friedman had already been supposing that the Book of Job was older and had more conservative spellings, and he did so by looking at the Masoretic text. What was interesting about the Masoretic text was that the Masoretic text did not have the conservative spellings, in that they included a lot of Matrice Lectionis, but there were certain cases where they were really inconsistent, and so David Noel Friedman argued on that basis that originally it had a really conservative writing style. When we found the Paleo-Hebrew script, in all but 2 cases, the Matrice Lectionis were completely absent in all but 2. And so Xun Liang So and several others have noted this recently as arguing that the Book of Job was originally a very conservatively written book. The problem, though, is that what ended up happening, though, is because we ended up dating the Paleo-Hebrew copies of Job so late, was that we were unable to determine whether or not this is indicative of Job coming from a late period or a scribe writing in an older style. And then there's the next really important ones that I'm going to talk about actually all come from the Book of Samuel. The scrolls for Samuel were found in Caves 1 and in Cave 4. These differences are extremely numerous, and I'm only going to be talking about a few of them. So, for example, 1 Samuel 1:23 in the Dead Sea Scrolls from Cave 4 reads, "Only the Lord established what proceeded out of your mouth," while the Masoretic text reads, "Only the Lord established His word." Also from Cave 4, verse 24, it reads, "With a 3-year-old bullock," whereas the Masoretic text actually reads, "with 3 bullocks." And with chapter 2:17, that for they, namely Eli's sons, dealt contemptuously with the offering of the Lord. Masoretic text completely altered. for the men, namely the worshippers of Eli's son's helpers, according to some exegetes, dealt contemptuously with the offering of the Lord.
Your mic's roboting again, Chris.
It is?
Yeah, it
Really?
was. Did you hear that?
I'm not getting
Lawrence?
that. I'm not getting that.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so anyways, so there's a whole lot of other readings as well. So like from the 4Q Sam, B, and from C, and there's also another one in a really interesting one in chapter 10, which actually adds an entire explanatory paragraph, which is completely absent from the Masoretic text, which actually helps clarify an otherwise really ambiguous passage. So it's also interesting that a lot of the readings of Samuel within the Dead Sea Scrolls actually better align with Septuagint readings than with the Masoretic text. So these are just some of them, and a lot of them also preserve names that were not not altered. So like in the Masoretic text, there was a propensity to try and alter out any references to the name Baal in different names, whereas those are a lot of times are preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There were a lot of theological alterations made in the Masoretic line of tradition, and this also is true of the alterations in that are in the Syriac Peshitta and the Targumim that were the differences in Targumim that were from the medieval era, and also those in the Dead Sea Scrolls as well. The Targumim from Job, for example, are very interesting in that they are exceedingly reduced in form. That a lot of them actually align with the Septuagint and the way the Septuagint decided to translate the book of Job than they do with any other readings of Job. So overall, the variations that we find in the book of Job or in the Dead Sea Scrolls, pardon me, are exceedingly numerous, and most of them are going to be like you find in the New Testament, as I mentioned before, and just spelling errors and stuff like that. But a relatively huge amount of them are also going to preserve older readings that were theologically altered at some point, or altered for the comfort of the scribes.
Yeah, I also want to add to that, the four books of Jeremiah, the 4Q, Jeremiah D, and that one in particular, the chapters are in different orders. So the prophecies that are called the oracles against the nations, in the Masoretic text, they're at the end of the book, but in the Septuagint, they're in the middle, and it's like Chris said, it seems like the Dead Sea Scrolls seem to hold to one tradition more over the other. And there's an interesting paper that I read about the differences between the Septuagint and the Masoretic text being, or the majority of it being surrounding water or having to do with water.
So Godless Galaxy asks, anything older than the Dead Sea Scrolls? If my memory is correct, they are our oldest manuscripts of anything in the Old Testament.
Well, not completely true. The oldest would be the Silver Scrolls, which are roughly 6th to 5th century BCE, and preserve probably priestly codes out from Numbers.
Well, I hope that answers your question, Godless Galaxy. All right. Yeah. So there is something I wanted to hit on. We covered the main stuff, but I really wanted to discuss the scholarship, quote unquote, of Jose O'Callaghan. This guy was a Jesuit priest, and I believe he was a and I think I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation of this. He was a papyrologist. Is that how you pronounce it?
Papyrologist.
Papyrologist. Okay, thank you. So in
He was the one who.
1971.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm probably gonna
Go
ruin your
ahead. No,
stuff. But,
finish your thing. Yeah.
he was the one who drew a comparison between text and mark and in a papyrus found in 7Q5, right?
Yes. I was just getting into that. So
I knew you were. I should have shut up.
in cave 7, this was excuse me. This was all the manuscripts in cave 7 were written in Greek, which differs greatly from everything else. I'm sorry, I should say nearly everything else. There were a few fragments in other caves that were written in Greek, but Cave 7 was all Greek. And I think there were 18 manuscripts found. There was also some writing on a wall or the floor, I believe, which they denote as 7Q, 19, and 20. So 7Q1 was identified pretty early, and so was 7Q2. These were fairly big pieces, so they could be identified. 7Q1 was Exodus 28, 4 through 7, and 7Q2 was Baruch 6, 43 through 44. So for the rest of them, when it came to dating, C.H. Roberts, one of the paleographers that actually did work on the scrolls, his initial dating was lined up pretty much perfectly with what everyone else was getting. So 7Q1 through 3 was dating to around 100 BC, and then 7Q4 through 18 dated through around 50 BC through 50 CE. And keep in mind that these dates are all within a margin of error of 25 years. So Jose O'Callaghan, he was not a paleographer. He may have seen the scrolls, but he was certainly not one of the paleographers assigned to the scrolls. And he made some pretty ridiculous claims, I think, that some people still think are true to this day. For example, this is the big one, and this is the one I'm predominantly going to talk about. 7Q5. He said that it contained Mark 6:52 through 3. He also said 7Q4 was 1 Timothy 3:16 through 4, 1 and 3. And then he said that there were 3 more of Mark. There was 1 of Acts, 1 of Romans, 1 of James, and 1 of 2 Peter. And this would stand opposed to a lot of the scholarship about some of these texts. Mostly I think 2 Peter, James, Acts, certainly. This would stand opposed to their the dating that scholars usually give for them.
Well, by
But this
a
was
lot
rejected.
too. Well, by a lot, because 7Q5, its paleographic dating was at 1 CE. So I mean, it would be virtually impossible for
Around there,
Mark to be talking about something that happened when Jesus died. I mean, when he's when he's a newborn.
You have to remember the whole margin of error thing, though.
Right. But that's what I'm saying. That's just paleographical. I mean, and the margin of error, even so, with the margin of error of 25 years, that still doesn't bring the death of Jesus.
I kind of noted that from C.H. Roberts, the paleographer. It was anywhere between 50 BC to 50 CE. That was from C.H. Roberts.
Okay.
Right. So anyways, this was rejected by the editor of the original publication, whose name was and I'm probably going to get his name wrong. Ballet, I think is his name, Baillet. So that was rejected. But O'Callaghan, he strived forward. So let's talk about the big one, 7Q5 being identified with Mark 652 to 3. Sorry, Mark 652 to 53. So this manuscript, while larger than the other ones found in the cache, contained 4 lines, 10 letters, and 1 full word. That word was Kai, which means and.
Yeah. Well,
And
and it actually it wasn't just Kai by itself. It was kite. That he thought that it was saying Kai Tiapra Santis.
Well, he thought it was part of something else, yeah.
Yeah.
But anyways, that was the one full word that could be clearly distinguished. It's right smack dab in the middle, Kai.
Right. But what I'm saying is that you have to necessarily say that there wasn't more to it, that it wasn't an entire word in itself. You know what I'm saying? Or pieces of it, like the KAI would be the end of something, and the
Sure,
TMP
no,
would be the
I get what you're I get what you're going. But anyways, so if the identification was correct, and Daniel Wallace wrote actually a pretty good blog post about this on his site. So you can look up 7Q5, the earliest New Testament papyrus, with that question mark. And I left a link in the description to more stuff on O'Callaghan's attributions. But anyways, so if his attribution was correct, the text could not contain the words to land, which was in the Greek, it would have been 9 letters too long. And in line 2, there are 2 clear letters that we can easily distinguish. There's a tau and there's an omega. And again, for it to fit in, the next letter had to be nu, and it's written like in English N in the script, or the hypothesis would collapse. So when it came to the letter nu, Karsten Thied, I think is how it's pronounced, living 1952 to 2004, he claimed that it was a partial nu. But he compared it to the nu in line 4. Sorry, he didn't compare it to the nu. He said it was a partial nu, but then comparing it to the nu in line 4 makes this identification of a nu there impossible. It just wouldn't fit. Now he pointed out some of the other letters that the scribe had written a little bit differently. Like there were 2 iotas on there. So Thied pointed out that one of them was slightly different than the other, but the variation in the nu was so much more different that it just could not have been the same letter.
Yeah, and it wasn't found in the other fragments to be like that either.
Yeah,
like that was the only place where it seemed to be like that.
Yeah, so some people, other scholars suggested a damaged alpha or a damaged iota. And the thing is, they even tried using the databases of the time, which gave like long lists of what something could have been. But the thing is, they weren't exhaustive. So people used the argument that, this program that we have gives us this as the only possible option. But the thing is, it was a program that wasn't complete. It just didn't include all the possible renderings of damaged letters.
Yep.
So that was... so while it's still unsure, I know that a lot of scholars are now thinking that it's from the Book of Enoch. But the myth that O'Callaghan has kind of started here, his sloppy scholarship, I would say, has kind of been passed down. And the thing is, this was this was rejected pretty early on by not only the people actually working on the scrolls, but also the intellectually honest theologians. And in fact, I left a link in the description of just 2 years after O'Callaghan made this identification. I forget his name, but a theologian wrote a paper pretty much debunking every single last one of these, and he would point out how some of the manuscripts that he was getting, that he was identifying, they could have only 3 letters on them, maybe even 2 letters, and he was starting to identify these on really nothing to go on. So it was just another hypothesis, and people who really wanted the truth of the Gospels and the New Testament, they kind of hooked onto it. They bought it hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, but I think it's important to note too that after he released his initial article, I believe he did it either right before a Biblical Studies convention or during this annual Canadian Society of Biblical Studies convention. The vast majority of his peers, they just ignored it, just shrugged it off, like literally had no effect. And a lot of people were looking forward to it because there weren't many people doing research on it, and they were excited to see something new. And just essentially, they were let down, very much so.
And to answer Godless Galaxy's question, what would that mean? For example, let's say the identification of his identification of 2 Peter was correct. We normally date 2 Peter to the early 2nd century. This would mean that it was written much earlier. So it would have pretty big implications in scholarship if some of these identifications turned out to be accurate. And to have, like, for example, if this was from Mark, if 7Q5 was from Mark, that would be huge too, because that would be the oldest copy of Mark that we have.
I don't know if you've already answered. I don't think you have, but to answer Jonah's question, is this a guy who originally made the claim that the Dead Sea Scrolls were written by Christians? Yeah, that
was Robert Eisman.
Yeah, well, Jose had a lot to do with it too. He was a very big component of it. I would argue. I mean, while he didn't start it, I would argue that he made it popular. But that they took the scrolls, and in between 68 and 70, more likely around 68, they took the scrolls with them to Qumran and hid them to keep them safe from the Romans. And they also hid a pirate treasure map to all of the goodies of Jerusalem that nobody has found, because treasure maps suck. Right, Lorence?
No, because people don't make treasure maps. Not a single pirate, first of all, ever.
For all those pirates that did. We keep seeing movies about them. Every single time. They had tons of them.
Oh, fuck you, Chris.
Oh, there's gonna be blood.
Look, when you read as much pirate history as I have, you get back to me.
That's
okay. So
that history is false. The Spaghetti Monster says so.
As a paratician, there's a question that's been bugging me. Do gay pirates like peg legs?
Nobody likes peg legs. You meant you lost a limb.
Actually, I thought all the girls like it because you have a really cool battle scar.
Okay. Next.
All right. So unless you guys have something else to add onto any of the topics we discussed, I think that should be it for us then.
I'm good. Only thing I want to say is people who follow Robert Eisman, please grow up.
Also, if you're a KJV onlyist, please grow up.
I like them better than those that follow Robert Eisman. Robert Eisman literally rejects the carbon dating for the Dead Sea Scrolls just so he can support his fringe theory.
Oh boy. Okay. But that is a topic for another time. But anyways, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I know that we actually had a good amount of people actually watch us live, which is great. And I hope you guys have enjoyed the stream. And I especially hope that you guys click on the link in the description of the main channel, Unheavenly Hosts. And this video will be mirrored onto that channel. And then
We have a
all
channel?
other. Yeah, we have a channel.
Yeah.
Yeah, Unheavenly Hosts.
Yeah.
Anyways.
What's up, guys? That's us. Hi.
And also go subscribe to Biblical History Skeptics and Disciple of Kairos. I think we got something going here. I think this is nice. I think we can really pull something great out of our asses.
And I think I speak for all of us when I say that we would love constructive criticism. If you guys think that we're doing something we shouldn't, or that we're not doing something that we should, like, please, like, give us some guidance. We are here for you guys.
Damn straight. And if you haven't already, make sure to drop a like on the video because we really appreciate that.
Yes, please do. Like and subscribe. Both Milwaukee Atheists, Unheavenly Hosts, Biblical History Skeptics, and myself, Disciple of Kairos. Please.
Yes, that would be greatly appreciated.
Mostly me.
I'm not even at 200 yet.
It's the start is like the slowest. Unless really you're is. Like,
I've got more Twitter followers than I do YouTube followers. Like, what's up with that?
So, anyways, that is the end of the show for today. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us, and we will probably see you sometime soon.
Pretty soon. Bye, guys.